might get going.
Yep.
So thanks everybody for joining us. Assessment SIG, we've had a couple of things on this year, but I'm really pleased to be introducing Christopher Wasow.
Wasow. Pretty
Wasow,
close.
my bad. Um, to talk to us about developing assessment literacy for staff within the
Hmm.
centres. Now, this is based on a presentation that Christopher's done. He did do at UECA recently,
Yes.
the
Assessment
assessment
symposium.
symposium, and it was very well received. So we thought, let's put it out here to the SIG, and we've got some ideas around assessment literacy and developing that in the centres. So if you're able to stay around till the end, we can survey you on that. But otherwise, actually, we can also put that survey out across we can email it out because we think we've got a nice idea to have some reading and some discussion. But please sit back and enjoy Christopher's presentation, and then we can have a think about whether there's a format here that we might be able to make use of for our assessment SIG. Thanks very much, Christopher.
Thanks, Cara. And hello, everyone. It's a small personal group today. That's quite nice. I'll try not to, since we didn't know how many to expect, since it's a smaller group. Yeah, I might ask you to type some stuff into the chat every now and then when you get a chance. So like Cara said, maybe I'll just share my screen here. Like Cara said, I presented at the UECA Assessment Symposium a little earlier in the year about something that we're doing at the University of Adelaide's English Language Centre, which it's not really, I mean, it's nothing particularly radical or outrageous, it's just a reading group, but it's been a really positive experience for me and for the teachers who have been involved. And so that's what I'm going to talk about, what the reading group is, how has it been working, and some things that I've learned. So in the next, I know this is scheduled for an hour, but we may not take the whole time. If we have some time for a chat, for chatting and questions, we'll definitely try to do that too, now that we've fixed some of these webinar issues, it seems. But this is what I hope we can do. I want to just explain what the planning steps were and the design logic behind this reading group that we're running. I'll share some of the feedback that I've received from our teachers and some of the things that I've learned, and maybe even inspire you to run your own in your own center. And there's a few resources at the end that might help you get started with that. So I don't know, maybe the first question you might be thinking, I mean, you joined the session, which is great, but you might still be thinking, why on earth run a reading group about assessment stuff? Well, at a year or two ago, I was on the assessment team at our center, and one of our objectives was to, in addition to improving the assessment practices at our center, was to develop the assessment literacy of the teaching staff. And so this was the initiative that I landed on. And there were a few reasons for that, not least because it's quite low cost and it's very scalable, but because you have the ability to time the sessions flexibly, you can really address current needs and issues within the center, which was a great benefit. And I'll talk about that a bit later. And lastly, it was a nice complement to the other forms of PD that we were running in our center. And if any of you were at the English Australia conference, you may have heard some of my colleagues talk about that in one of the sessions there. All right, audience participation time. I wonder, before I talk about how I planned this reading group, I think it's probably a good idea that we have a sort of a shared understanding of what assessment literacy actually is. So in your Zoom chats, I'll share my screen again, sorry. In that Zoom chat, maybe you can tell me what you think. How would you define assessment literacy? What is it? What does it involve? And actually, I'll be a little bit more specific. How would you define language assessment literacy? Language assessment literacy. You've joined a webinar hosted through the Assessment SIG, so I assume you're all interested in that sort of thing. What is assessment literacy? What does it involve? Any ideas? If you want, share them in the chat. Otherwise, in about 30 seconds, I'll share some of my own thoughts. I think the chat's working now too. I think I put the option on for everyone. Oh yes, sorry, Philip and JC. Thanks, Kara. That's okay. If you don't have many thoughts. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Knowledge and understanding of principles, ability to apply assessment design principles. Well, this is prior to designing the program. This is something that I read and landed on. You can see the source down there, Giraldo 2018. Like you have said, you guys have said in the chat, sort of defines it in terms of the knowledge of assessment, or rather the knowledge of applied linguistics, assessment theories and concepts, understanding of certain core principles related to assessment or language assessment, sorry, specifically, as well as a bunch of discrete skills. As well as discrete skills. So, for example, this might be instructional skills, like, and you can see on the graph there. In terms of designing language assessments or educational measurement. And what I really liked about this article is that it contained what the author called 66 illustrative descriptors. And these ranged from reasonably simple or more basic aspects of assessment literacy, like being able to collect formal data and informal data of students' language development, up to more specific things like clearly defining a language construct a test will give information about, to really quite complex things like the ability to calculate reliability and validity indices using appropriate methods like kappa and ppmc. And obviously you'd be in a very specific role if you were doing that, but that's part of what that assessment literacy includes. So with that in mind, let me talk about a little bit about how I designed this program, because when I started planning, I wanted to do more than just choose a set of articles and that are about assessment and just say, let's have a chat about them. That might have worked, but to make it more meaningful, I really wanted to make sure meaningful and aligned with good practice. I wanted to make sure that I built it around a framework. So what I landed on was the English Australia CPD framework, and specifically, maybe you can see here, specifically section 3, assessment, feedback, and reporting. And I suppose I could have used something like those assessment literacy descriptors, and that may have worked too. But in any case, this framework gave me structure and a clarity, and sort of ensured I wasn't just dipping into topics randomly, but was building towards something that was very clearly defined, a clearly defined knowledge and capability set. I also, before I did the full planning, I did a quick pulse check with our staff to see what they were most interested in. And you can see the results of that there. Obviously, most people were not really that interested in moderation, probably to the surprise of not many of you. Hi, and if you've got, thanks. If you've got questions, please shoot them up. Julie, did you have a question? If you do, maybe
I'm not sure that
drop it in.
Julie can speak. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah. If you do, maybe drop it in the chat, because we're this
know what
webinar
we're doing.
format's a bit it's a bit tenuous. So most people were not interested in moderation, but there was clearly strong interest in things like feedback, task design, using assessment data to support learning. And this was a useful starting point and something I was trying to balance between teacher interest and that CPD coverage. So after that, I've just worked through that framework really, and identified 10 key focus areas that I thought would give a full and balanced coverage. Sorry, Cara, are you about to?
I think I can say ask to unmute, it says. Oh, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Don't worry. Keep going. I'm my
I
bad.
think everyone's here. So I know that's quite small, but if we look at that very first one there, again, this is from that English Australia CPD framework, and this is the first criteria, assessment knowledge and types, and just the description under foundation. And if you read it, you can see identifies the need for different assessments, explains basic assessment principles. Um, you can see, for example, how this fed into my first few sessions. So I ended up with a plan like this, where I had my session numbers, what the focus was. I defined what the objective and the takeaway for the teachers would be, how I'd want to preview the task, and what follow-up activity or homework I might give the teachers to sort of apply those ideas, and how it mapped to the competency framework. Um, so at the end of the day, it wasn't just what do you think of this article for each session. It was structured to guide teachers from that reflection into that insight and possible action, and it was scaffolded through the English Australia CPD framework. And so while I did scaffold the topics throughout the whole program, the choice of each article and the discussion questions that we had, the tasks that we did, they also needed to really support the teachers to participate at any stage. Whether someone came to all 10 sessions or whether they were just able to come to one, they were able to do that and participate, and it would still be contributing to a coherent development pathway. All right. So one of the other sort of pieces of documentation in my planning was after I had my pulse check for my teachers, familiarized myself with CPD framework, and I had my plan. I ultimately ended up with a table that looked a bit like this, where it had my 10 focus areas for each of the sessions. So you can see we had an introduction to assessment literacy, understanding assessment types and principles, designing effective assessments, providing feedback, diagnostic assessments, reporting on achievement, etc. And showed how each of the sessions connected to a specific competency on the English Australia framework. And you can see moderation is grayed out here because in my case, none of the teachers were really interested in reading and talking about that. It's something we already do quite a lot in our center, so perhaps that's why they weren't too interested about it. But I think this was important because if a teacher attended multiple sessions, they could feasibly point to their participation and say, well, here's how I've developed in 3.2, selecting and designing assessments, or, here's how I'm working towards accomplished in 3.3, which is about giving feedback. And just to reiterate, this was intended to be a very informal professional development opportunity. We didn't formally assess anyone. There was no certification. It was just meant to be informal way to provide a clear bridge between assessment literature and practice and that professional growth, but also to make sure the program had some credibility and a sense of cohesion if a teacher did attend all of the sessions. It also meant that I could recommend teachers log their hours of participation for CPD points, and some of them ended up doing that too. The timing was very sporadic of all of these sessions, I have to say. Initially, the teachers said that they would love to have done it once a term or once every 5-week cycle, but that didn't end up working, and I'll talk about that a bit later. More logistically, this is how I reached out to the teachers and organized it. So, we use Teams, we set up a meeting. So here, every time we had a reading group coming up, I'd send this out with the topic intro and the meeting details, kind of a little summary of what we've done so far, the when, where, and what. There was a reminder about what was involved. So in this case, it was half an hour to 1 hour of reading of the selected article, and then a half an hour for a group discussion, as well as, how many CPD points that could be logged for, and a link to the English Australia's website. some pre-reading reflection, like we give our students all the time, and of course the reading and the discussion questions they're attached. And I do recognize that, oh, we've got some more people popping in. I definitely recognize that for some articles, it being part of a university English center, we're able to access this literature through our institutional subscriptions. And so that made it possible for us to do that and share these articles. But if you were running something and didn't have that resource, you would probably have to rely on open access articles. So let me show you a few examples of the sort of discussion questions we were running in those discussion sessions. We'll look at just a few specifically, but most of the time it's just a handout. Here's some of the discussions. This one, for example, this was an article which I always put at the top again. This was an article about the use of LLMs to support listening test assessment development, and how we can use that to accelerate the process, but how it also might lead to issues with validity. So we've got the article at the top, put our discussion questions in the middle, and there's a sort of an application task at the end there. I'll talk about the lessons I've learned a little bit later, but just about every teacher who's come to one of these sessions said they'd like more time. So these were all really a tight 30-minute session. And every teacher who's come said, oh, I'd really like if we had more time to sit and discuss with each other. I also had a lot of feedback that the teachers wanted to do more practical things during the session while we were talking with each other. I planned follow-up tasks to share with the teachers to get them to reflect and try to apply in their teaching. But in general, I've been finding that doing those in our time together has been really well received. Here's another example. This was a session that was on more of a foundational article. In fact, many of you assessment heads would be familiar with Bachman and Palmer's 1996 test usefulness chapter. Pretty foundational article in language assessment. Had the article, I have a bit of a warm-up task that we did, which was just to check the understanding of what the principles were. And then down here, the discussion questions. And I'm just going to zoom in on that for a minute there. And maybe you can just take 60 seconds to read through it. I'll just note that this acronym here, IST, that stands for our integrated skills task. It's one of the summative assessments that we do on our direct entry program.
Chris, at some point, if you do want to take questions, I think that you can just ask the people with their hand up to turn on their microphone.
I think that'll work, right?
Lisa did that. Now we think about it.
Yeah. So like Cara said, as we go, yeah. It's a small group, so please interrupt, chuck your mic on if you've got a question.
Wesley and Julie had put their hands up. Julie, you were first. Do you want to take your mic off and ask a question? Or
might have been an accident.
Wesley, maybe. Okay.
Yeah, that's all right. All right. So what you might notice about those questions is obviously they're not just questions asking the teachers to demonstrate their understanding of these principles, but asking them to really reflect on how they relate to our assessments in our center. And the follow-up task I'd prepared for this session was to evaluate part of our IST, our integrated skills task, like the listening test component or the reading test specifications against principles that we discussed in that session. But that ended up becoming the application task inside our discussion. We did that together during the discussion time. And that turned out to be a really useful practice, tailoring those questions to be center specific, because then we could use it as the discussion as a listening post, to help surface blind spots in our assessments or spark new ideas. but also to give the teachers a bit of a voice in shaping our assessment practices. And that was a really powerful part of this format too. And actually, as a direct result of this session specifically, because of the input from the teachers, we identified a need for further benchmarking in a particular speaking task. So it turned out to be very productive. And again, the lessons will come in just a moment, but that was really important for making this relevant and useful, is tailoring the questions to center specific issues or practices. So yeah, second part of this, again, if we don't take the full hour, again, that's fine. We can ask some questions at the end. Talked about how I went about designing this program and what we've sort of covered in our discussion groups. So in the next part, I just wanted to share some of the feedback from the teachers, as well as air some challenges that I've had, and not necessarily provide you with some solutions, maybe or maybe not, if you decide to do it yourself. And so the first one is this. And I'm sure you've all had the experience of planning a class very carefully, only to go in that day and, have lots of things go wrong. Students ask all sorts of different types of questions, and you have to adapt to that messiness and those emergent issues, because that adaptation is what will really help the students at the end of the day. And I think the same was true for this reading group. So if you do it, be prepared to adapt your plans. Just as a few examples of that, I mentioned that I designed this program to have a scaffolded progression in mind, starting from very foundational concepts to build towards more complex ones. But at the same time, like I said, it was informal. It was never meant to be a formal course. Instead, it was just intended to complement our broader PD ecosystem, where the aim was to give teachers choice, agency, some flexibility in the entry points for their professional learning. But actually, I think what drove most of the positive engagement and the positive feedback, it wasn't really the clear teacher development afforded by the design, but I think it was the responsiveness. And I just wanted to share some of the changes that I ended up having to make to show that responsiveness, even in just the first handful of these sessions. So this was my original plan. Everything I've highlighted here, I ended up having to change, even in these first 4 sessions. Sessions 2 and 4, I ended up changing the timing of these. I switched the weeks because I moved the feedback session to coincide with a week that our teachers were actually giving feedback on an exam practice task, which meant that we were sort of addressing those issues and developing those skills in real time and addressing a real work challenge. Here for this session about assessment design, I originally had something far more foundational about test design, but changed the article sort of last minute to explore the same process, but through the lens of using generative AI, since we had a number of our contract teaching staff developing test materials. Some other examples, I removed this preview activity and integrated it into the discussion. I embedded the follow-up tasks into the discussion, or I just dropped them completely. I changed the target competencies. It was very messy, and that was okay, I think, because my point is, while I planned a lot up front, I think the power of this format as a professional development format is how easily you can shift it and align it with your teacher's immediate work needs. Obviously, we know as educators that scaffolding is a very powerful learning tool, but I think the flexibility to respond to your teacher's interests and your center's priorities is critical for professional development. And I think that's a huge boon of this format. Okay, lesson 2. Something you don't have to type into the chat, just something to reflect on. Like I said, the objective of this reading group was as part of our broader professional development to build assessment literacy. But why should we build assessment literacy? Again, you don't have to type your answer. And it might seem like a self-evident, strange or self-evident question. Why? Because, well, assessment is a core part of teaching. But how would you articulate it? If you had to rationalize exactly why it's important to build assessment literacy. And in my thinking and in my planning, my thought was this: that teacher who has high assessment literacy is in a better place to make better informed teaching decisions, because they're using their assessment and their understanding of assessment and its uses to make we have assessments to make decisions. And a teacher can use that to make more targeted and responsive learning experiences, because that will lead to better student outcomes. And I think ultimately that's what we want. That's what we want. We want our students to have better learning outcomes. So assessment literacy lets a teacher make better informed teaching decisions, which leads to more targeted, responsive learning episodes, which leads to ultimately improved outcomes. Now, that's not the lesson yet, but before the lesson, I just wanted to share some of the feedback from the teachers, because about halfway through, I stopped and asked our teachers how it was going, what their feedback was, and the responses were very positive. Here are just some of the comments. So, taken verbatim from the survey. The most valuable aspect has been the opportunity to engage in critical discussions with colleagues about assessment and how it applies to our teaching. The discussion has been a great opportunity to share our perspectives, which impacts positively on the centre's assessment practices. It's great to do this as a group. You know, I know it's not uncommon for us to sit down and read an article by ourselves, but this is something that came up again and again, doing it as a group. Having time to have conversations has been so valuable, to hear different perspectives and learn from each other, something that we are often too busy to do. So setting aside time to do this has been meaningful in contributing to our own professional growth. Those were great comments to see, I think, having done a few sessions. And what it made clear to me was that I think this format, this reading group, was succeeding in being a format that was highly engaging, that was intellectually relevant to the teachers, and that it was collaborative. The teachers really valued the space to explore assessment issues in a semi-structured way, but also in a peer-led environment. And I think that strategic scheduling, like aligning different workshops with different things happening at the center, had a tangible impact on their engagement. So part of that survey was more quantitative. I wanted to know, how relevant they thought the articles were, how useful the discussions were, whether the timing with aligning with different things happening made the articles more relevant, whether it was having a positive impact on their assessment literacy, whether they thought it was a worthwhile PD experience. And you may or may not be surprised to see that I had 100% broad agreement in all of these categories from the attendees. Now, I'm talking about specifically about the people who have come to the reading group sessions. So they really like this format. But I did also ask, and I'll just read this verbatim, the question that I put on the survey. Have you made or planned any changes to your teaching or assessment practices as a direct result of the reading group? And the response was a little less positive there. What I think is clear from the first few sessions that I've been facilitating is that they're very engaging. It was easy to get people on board with it, but having those inspiring discussions didn't guarantee classroom change at all. And I suppose there are many reasons for that. It could be just that the teachers feel there are structural barriers, in terms of the curriculum being fixed or not having a space to trial different things. The program was very informal by design, and there was no formal commitment or post-session follow-up or check-in. So I planned reflective post follow-up tasks, but I wasn't checking in with teachers to make sure they were doing those things.
Can I just
Maybe it's not always conscious. Yeah, please,
can I
please.
just suggest that, Chris? Like sometimes I think when you sort of developing assessment literacy, it's not necessarily something that you take and do in the classroom, but it
Mm,
fuels your decisions and your values and your goals. Like it sort of
mm,
reframes your thinking in certain ways, and so you may, in effect, be responding to students or circumstances in ways that have shifted a little bit since you've developed
mm,
this awareness. And maybe that's something that's not really sort of tangible or evident to teachers, but I would anticipate that
good
yeah, that
point.
growth, there's a sort of a growth mindset there really. There's been growth in awareness, so I reckon there would be opportunities where that is sort of coming back into the classroom in small
Mm,
ways.
really good point. Yeah, definitely. And there are definitely applications of thanks, Cara. There are definitely applications, I think, in terms of what they've taken from the articles. And I think the choice of article makes that easier and harder.
Mhm.
The articles about, test usefulness may not have clear direct application, whereas something like using LLMs to design tests did, because the teachers could take that and design practices that aligned with our assessments, that we're using those emergent technologies. So overall, the feedback has been good. Sorry, it looks like you're about to say something else.
No, I was just going to say there was some other comments in there. Lisa was saying that change to teaching practice isn't always conscious, which is sort of a similar point
Mm.
to me. It can take time to percolate before you can implement. Tony suggests that maybe 71% were already doing everything right in the classroom.
Maybe they were. Yes. So that's a really good point. So I've put there ideas have not necessarily led to action, but maybe that's not true. Like you've said, maybe the changes are subtle and
Yeah.
not realized in more obvious ways. Mm. The last lesson here, interest is not the issue. This relates to the people who have not been attending the reading groups. Um, and so while I was really interested in the feedback from the people who have come, I was equally interested in the feedback from those who have not come. And so here's what they had to say. 90% of the people who hadn't come were already aware of this PD format, the reading group, and that same 90% indicated that they were interested in attending future sessions. And so that suggests to me that the messaging that's really cut through, and even among the people who have not attended, there's a lot of goodwill around this. I think the teachers have talked to each other. The ones who have come have said, "Oh, that was great. I can't wait to go to the next one." And so there's a lot of interest in it, even though they've not been able to attend. In terms of their people who have not attended, their PD preferences, again, you might not be surprised by this at all, but 90% said that face-to-face workshops are the most valuable form of PD for them. Nothing groundbreaking there. And what I think for me personally going forward, despite some of the non-attendees showing interest in recordings or hybrid sessions, many still prefer that interactive face-to-face component. And you saw that in the comments from the teachers too. They loved sitting down and talking to the other teachers. And so I think an interesting point for that is, especially if you want to do something like this and you can resource it and the demand is there, perhaps holding a repeat session would be okay on a different day and time. Recording, yeah, you could do that. You could offer in hybrid. But I know, speaking personally, I'm going to be very careful doing that because it's clear that teachers value the face-to-face, and using those other methods might dilute that high value in-person discussion. So I'm going to tread carefully there because I think in this format, the teachers really appreciated doing it together.
Can I ask as
And I'm
well, was there chocolate involved?
No, next time I'll bring
Oh,
some chocolate.
oh,
They didn't
absolutely.
even need They didn't even need that, did they? Well, that's it. Did they come because there was no chocolate? Well, actually, and again, no surprises here, but the number one reasons the teachers didn't attend, of course, time and timetabling. Um, timetable clashes and workload were the number one reason for non-attendance. But and no chocolate, maybe I didn't put that on the survey. But um, I think what that tells me is the barriers are logistical and not motivational. And
Mm.
um, I think that's a better challenge to have because getting that buy-in sometimes is difficult. But the teachers wanted to attend, and it was just a timetable conflict that was not allowing them to do so. So to sort of summarize, we're at the end here. Um, what have I learned so far? Well, if you're going to do something like this, and I'd recommend you do, it's been really a positive thing for me and for the teachers who've been involved. Plan intentionally, but be prepared for and embrace some of that messiness. Since I think that flexibility is really key to keeping everyone engaged and making sure you're addressing emergent issues and needs. Lesson two, of course, teachers love to talk about teaching with other teachers. Um, but with this sort of initiative, given the topics and the focuses, um, to make sure, I think the comments we've had about teacher change and change in action are very pertinent. But if we want more explicit changes, um, there probably needs to be some intentional follow-up to make that change, enable that change more practically. And finally, I think this format I'm finding is, again, it's nothing revolutionary, but it's proving to be very popular. And I regularly have teachers asking me when the next reading group is. I hope I can make it to the next reading group. But there's no perfect time slot, and busy teachers will dip in and dip out. So I think having something that's structured, but that will allow for bespoke participation at each session is important too. So if I'm not sure if I've inspired you to start your own reading group, I hope I have. And if I have, and you're here thinking, oh, I want to think about this a little bit more. Obviously, you don't have to do this related to assessment. You could do it related to any aspect of teaching. But I've saved a few resources here at that QR code and the link here. What I might do is I might chuck that in the chat if you're interested. A few resources that might help you get started. Sorry, Cara.
No, I was going to say Lisa's put a question in there about whether there was any other support for the program, like rooms provided or PD hours paid,
Mm,
etc.
good question. No. And and that was sort of why I mentioned earlier. It was one of the reasons I landed on this was because it's very low cost.
Mm.
It's opt-in. So obviously teachers can claim CPD points for it, but they're doing the reading on their own time. They're coming to a half hour when we've changed the time to 45-minute meeting, during their workday. That's not paid in addition. Rooms, in terms of scheduling, we just have a system for booking rooms, so that's not been too much of a challenge. Um, but it's totally voluntary, like most professional development activities. Um, mm.
Hmm.
By the way, anyone else, if you've got some more, we're just about at the end here. If you've got questions, start typing them into the chat.
Or we
At
can
that link,
actually,
you'll find, yeah,
or you
Car.
can ask them too. You can take off your microphone.
Yeah. We don't need to just listen to me talking.
I think you can just take off your microphone. Yeah. Reminds me, we used to have one of the teachers here used to run a very grassroots journal club, and the
Mm,
teachers would decide on a journal article, not necessarily assessment related, but it was always about a lunch. And that teacher was very big on breaking bread in order to sit down and talk things through, and that food is a very big
mm,
part of shared learning in these communities of practice. So they used to go away for a lovely lunch somewhere on the campus
mm.
during week zero, like when there was no
Yeah,
teaching
yeah.
on. But that's fallen by the way for the moment, but it used to be very popular.
Yeah, I bet. I'll have to I'll have to think about that too. That's a nice way to
Yeah,
I think,
little lunchtime session.
yeah.
Yeah. Are there any questions from people? I've got a wayward mouse.
Oops,
No questions coming
no
through.
questions
Oh,
coming through. That's okay. Um,
but
whoops. We've obviously got the recording if you want to come back to any of this. We've got the resources there at those at that link if you want to check out any of those things. There's some of the oops, sorry, I think I've turned my screen off, haven't I?
you've stopped sharing. I wonder, Christopher, would you mind showing the beginning of that survey that we'll send around? Just
Yeah,
perhaps while
sure.
we've got some people here, we could mention, as I did at the start, that we were thinking about how might we sort of
Sorry.
amplify this approach to things in this assessment SIG
Mm,
space. And we, as the SIG conveners, we have a shared team space where we're putting all of these resources in there, and oh, this would be great for teachers, and this would be great for assessment designers and managers, etc. And we thought, but we can't really. I think that TeamSpot doesn't necessarily work for everybody. You'd have to have your center would have to have a Microsoft setup with Teams, I think. So we decided not to
mm,
go forward with Teams, but potentially share out or go use a Padlet and invite the SIG members to join, and we put up a reading for a 2 week period or something, and just get people to engage with the reading, asking questions or giving their opinions, and see if we got a little bit of a discussion forum going. And then on the basis of anything that came out of that, we could say, oh, you know what, that was a bit of a hot topic. Maybe we can transfer that into a staff room table, or just
mm,
park that one, and a month or two later we can have another reading. And the reason with that is just that there's so much changing at the moment in language
mm,
assessment and assessment more broadly. And we thought, we could really source some articles around sort of, the assessment literacies that Chris has pointed out, but also on some of the changes around Gen AI, et cetera, and just tap into what some of the thought leaders are saying in that space. People may be interested in dropping in on that. So probably the best way we can do that is send that out to all of the SIG members, get Sophie to do
mm,
that.
mm.
And just think, we want to know, I mean, before we go setting anything up, we just want to feel the pulse really. And like, is this worth us setting up, or is it something that people just go, I
Yeah.
I don't have time. It's not something that I'd be happy to engage in or be likely to engage in. Hmm.
Mm. So maybe, like you said, Cara, maybe it's best we like I can chuck the link in there now, but maybe it's best we send it out with the email. If you can help us with that.
Yeah, I think so. And then we hopefully get people aren't great at doing surveys. I've tried surveys before, but that's indicative as well, like that it could be a problematic format if people can't be bothered to do the survey. So look, if you feel like it's something that's of interest, then look out for the survey
Mm,
and let us know your thoughts.
mm. Think of it as a national reading group.
Yeah, why not? Be great.
Mm. It's hard to have lunch on Zoom. There's a chocolate emoji, probably.
What a problem. Well, could look like something else. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chris.
No
That's
worries.
been
Thanks
really,
everyone for
really
coming.
good. And my goodness, you're so organized with setting that up. Like that's a really, really inspirational approach with your frameworks there and linking to the English Australia CPD.
Thank you.
That's great. Lucky, lucky teachers.
Mm, thank you.
Yeah. All right then. Okay. Well, thank you everybody. And we look out for that survey coming around in the next week or two.
Yeah. And I'm sure also the link to the recording if you happen to want to listen to this again.
Yeah, I think Soph will probably just record that on the uh, on the website. It'll be in a box there.
Mm,
Somebody's sending us chocolate.
there it
Thanks,
is.
Lisa. Doesn't look too dodgy. That's fine.
Yeah.
JC sending us noodles. All
Alrighty.
right.